Hello, bird nerds. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. Behind me is my friend Mr. Swift Parrot. Thanks, JJ Harrison, for Creative Commons usage of that amazing pic. Um, would you be impressed if I told you that a group of people had planted 89,000 trees that are koala friendly, koala food, that 2.8 million bone seed weeds in the course of the tree planting and other activities have been removed, and that over 1,800 volunteeros have been participating in this activity? Well, if you're as half as impressed as I am, you'll be very happy to welcome Janine Duffy, the president of the Koala Clancy Foundation, and that's the group that's been doing all these great works. So I've invited Janine on so that we can talk about how benefiting one species that is now on the endangered list can help several others. Janine, welcome back to the show. You were on, it's a couple of years ago now, so it's good to have you back. How are you?
Fantastic, mate. It's good to be back.
Excellent. Now, for those who don't know, apart from being the president of the Koala Clancy Foundation, Janine has been running a ecotourism company for, well, it's got to be about 15 years now, doesn't it, Janine? And
30.
Yeah, actually, I've really, I'm thinking about when you kind of went massive networker and got all the other ecotourism firms sort of involved in a network, and you're all working to achieve the same kind of goals and aims. Tread lightly and ethical tourism. It's a great story. So, Janine, tell us when Koala Clancy Foundation began, and what was the seeds of what planted the seeds in your mind of pulling it together, getting it going?
We started Koala Clancy Foundation in 2015 officially, but we were kind of moving along that path since about 2012 when I realised that bone seed in the Yuyangs, that terrible invasive weed, was having a huge effect on the koalas. Basically, koalas weren't really seen in trees that were surrounded by thick bone seed. And so with our tourism company, Echidna Walkabout, we started asking our guests to help us pull it out. And the effect, Grant, was immediate. We sometimes got koalas using those trees within a week of us pulling out the bone seed around them. And these were trees that they'd never been seen using before.
And let's put the Yuyangs in context. It's a mountain range on the western edge of Port Phillip Bay, which is the bay that Melbourne surrounds with its sprawling suburban tentacles. So it's on the way towards Geelong and quite a bit inland from the coast. But why bone seeds are important in terms of koalas and koala trees is that bone seeds form such dense thickets when they really get going, and especially after fire, a cool fire, or cultivation. So when people are ploughing fire tracks and fire breaks and things like that, bone seeds can be the first thing in. And the koalas just can't get through a thicket of bone seed to get to the trees. So they're a barrier. They're effectively a vegetation fence, aren't they?
This is what we believe, Grant. Now, it hasn't been scientifically tested, and it would be fantastic to do that kind of study. But when we put two and two together about the effect bone seed was having, we thought removing it's not going to do any harm. It's going to benefit, lots of other species because there's not many native species that use it anyway. And it's something that Parks Victoria and DSC have always promoted, is that people should remove it by hand whenever they can. So we thought, you know what, why not try? And Echidna Walkabout's all about getting people to help nature while they're enjoying it. And we wanted a hands-on project that people could do while they were traveling in Australia that would actually help. And 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 so we presented this to our clients, who were mostly overseas guests, and a lot of them are, paying a fair bit of money for the tours. They're traveling at a sort of middle to upper sort of level of budget, and we weren't sure how this would go, but they loved it. They absolutely adored it. Some groups of people didn't want to stop pulling out bone seed. Even when we promised them seeing more koalas, seeing birds, seeing kangaroos in the wild, they was sort of, but we've got to help the koalas now. So it made us realise that there is enormous potential in the travel industry to match up great projects that help wildlife and nature with willing volunteeros, we call them, with these willing people who are willing to get their hands dirty and do stuff to help nature. And usually they're willing to do it for free as long as it helps. Why don't we do more of that?
Well, precisely. I mean, that's why I like to talk to anyone and everyone I can that's sort of in operating in this field. That we need to connect everyone who's got the knowledge and has done research with the people like yourself who are out there showing what Australia and the koalas in the wild, showing them to people who have come here specifically to enjoy and experience what we all sort of take for granted. And so the positive benefits are there, but it also highlights how, with this taking our own backyard for granted, is why we've let it get into such a parlous state. I think everyone thinks, oh, well, koalas, kangaroos, echidnas, they're always going to be there. But we're perilously close to the situation where you're going to have to go to Australia Zoo or Taronga or Melbourne Zoo to see a koala. We're perilously close to that.
In fact, I heard a shocking thing from one of our volunteers a little while ago. She said, I've just been up to southeast Queensland and I saw loads of koalas. And I said, really? Where? Because I know that they're in terrible trouble in southeast Queensland. Yeah. And she saw loads of koalas, Grant. And you know what she said? Currumbin.
Well, there we
sanctuary.
That's it. So that and that is what worries me a little bit about the conversations that we have these days, Janine, is that people are starting to think, oh well, it doesn't really matter if we lose them from Western Sydney because there's plenty in the zoo. That's like saying, I mean, it's just So I really appreciate that you are taking. This is one thing about the way you, and there's a whole network of groups like Koala Clancy Foundation. So we should talk about that and how you are all trying to achieve the same things. And one of those things is connecting important habitat that exists to each other so that koalas can move about in the landscape. And you're doing that by getting local landholders and public landowners to cooperate in that one goal. So let's talk about planting trees before we go back to some of the other management issues. Let's just talk about how that project got started.
Can I change the subject, the topic a little bit, Grant?
Of course you
Because
can.
there's something I really want to talk about that you've just raised. Um, and that's the idea of wildlife corridors. There's this there's this idea that we have all these wonderful national parks that animals are isolated in, and they're desperate to get from one to the other. And I think that's wrong.
I let's tease that out.
Yeah,
I don't think it's totally wrong, but I don't think it's the answer.
it's
I,
not
I
the whole story. Yeah, you're right.
and when I mention it, I'm not. I hadn't even thought about national parks. I'm thinking more about the farmer on the north side of town who isn't who has some koalas or some greater gliders or some sugar gliders or some amazing snakes on his patch of remnant bushland. But 2 farms away, there's another farm that's got similar habitat, but they're completely isolated for those animals. They're not isolated for the birds; they can fly there. But but my idea of promoting the connections is these local connections that mean that animals don't have to cross roads or put themselves in danger to get to animals have to find new mates. Young koalas get hunted out of a territory by dominant father, and they have to go and find new friends. And I don't think national parks that are 400 kilometres away need to be our priority for connecting, but it's farms and public reserves and schools with mature trees at the back of the oval. And all these kind of resources are what we need to begin connecting. And that makes it possible because you might only need to plant 100 trees, not 50,000 trees, to actually make a difference. Do you agree with my take on it there?
Yeah, but I'm trying to change the conversation a little bit, and so I'm using this platform, I suppose, and something that you started talking about as. And the thing you said there that most resonated with me was the farmer who's got the bit of remnant bushland with all of this wildlife living on it. And you're exactly right. So much of our wildlife is living and thriving on farms. It's it's not living and thriving in national parks where we expect them to be. And the reason for that, especially in our part of Victoria, is that the national parks and the reserves are on the poor land that
Mm.
couldn't be farmed.
Yeah. Now
All
that
the good land was farmed.
and that's something that I sort of highlight a little bit. Governments are very good at trumpeting their new national parks. I mean, New South Wales have been doing this. Look at the we've increased the I don't remember the figure, but it's some amazing percentage of new national parks. But guess what? It's shit farms.
Yes.
That's what they've resumed. They've
Yes.
resumed they've resumed land that the carrying capacity is so low that nobody wants to exploit it anymore. So
Exactly.
so
Because
if you're
it's
not
and that's how
if
it's cheap.
yeah, and if you're not going to actively rehabilitate it,
No,
you haven't actually added an asset and
no.
to keep then manage the weeds and the feral animals in those places. Yeah, so yeah, we
Mm,
agree.
mm.
what
Um,
what what I would love to see happen, and I had a discussion about this last night with someone. I mean, urban spaces are also becoming really. Just think how the swift parrot for behind me would go without Royal Park and without La Trobe University in
yeah,
terms of
yeah, yeah.
Victoria. If all those feed trees disappeared from those two locations, how would they? I mean, would they make it to the New South Wales feeding grounds? You know, would they
And
would they
Grant,
run out of food?
how many animals would be left in Far East Gippsland if it hadn't been for towns like Malakuta being protected in those fires?
Absolutely.
The wildlife we have around towns and cities is sometimes, the only place where they can thrive now,
And that
because we help
and
the environment a bit
yeah,
around our
and
towns.
that's why I really appreciate what you said about changing the conversation. I've been trying to shift. You know, it's now. You know, I did my first interview for the bird emergency in 2017, and then various things. You know, cancer and a pandemic got in the way. So there was a whole lot where it hasn't happened. But my view of what I was saying back there to what I think now has really drastically changed. And so much of the valuable wildlife habitat that we have are exactly what we've just been talking about. Land that has not yet been exploited in the rural private land holdings, and then public assets like the municipal reserve, the footy ground, you know, the trees that ring the cricket club, the tennis club, the footy ground, the showground, the car parks at the back, or that, you know, that wasteland that fringe every industrial estate, you know, with the panel beater and the motor wreckers and whatnot. There's always some trees at the back, schools, and then botanic gardens, public parks, and old established gardens, private gardens. These are all really important places that if we connected them and, you know, put in ways for possums, koalas to get from one to the other without being savaged by dogs and hit by cars. Apart from all the benefits of having something to eat, you know, and somewhere to sleep. But if we thought about all of those things every time we developed one new bit of land and reclaimed one new bit of land, we'd be in a much better place. How far does 89,000 trees go? I mean, give us an idea of what the scale of that is. So
not very far.
But give us an idea. Are you doing? Has that been corridors mainly?
Yes and no. We don't call them corridors. We call them homes. We've got a situation, Grant, where we've got two little mountain ranges that are national parks or public reserves. One's the Yuyangs, which is a regional park, and one's the Brisbane Ranges National Park. Both of these were known good koala habitat in the past, but are no longer because of climate change. So the forests are drying out all over Australia. And in our area, the tops of hills now hold trees that are not koala habitat anymore. They can't eat them anymore. They're too dry. The nutritional value of the leaves has probably fallen to a point where it just simply is pointless for a koala to eat them.
And perhaps
they're too
there's
hot.
A toxicity effect as well
exactly.
As the amount of water that a tree has access to, well, the volatile oils might be in a higher concentration, which might make them either toxic or just unpalatable.
And this is what Professor Ian Hume found and published in 2008. He said that the koalas will decline even though you see no change in the forest structure itself. So our forests are not getting cut down, but they're not habitat anymore. So koalas can't live and thrive and breed on the tops of the Brisbane Ranges and the Yuyangs anymore. And so what we're doing is we're not trying to get koalas from the Yuyangs to the Brisbane Ranges. That's pointless. It's not going to give them anything. What we're trying to do is put back the habitat that used to be prime koala habitat, which is in the river valleys on the farms.
So that means the high value agricultural land is generally on those river flats and those riparian fringes along creeks,
Yes.
and so that because that's where in a time of flood, all the nutrients get left
Yes.
on those places, and they become the
Yes.
prime agricultural habitat,
Yes.
agricultural asset on
Yes.
any property. And
Yeah.
this is where it's a really complicated discussion, because when new developments happen, the we're gonna have a reserve, an offset, a reserve. We'll give you 28 acres as part of this, 10, 10 let's pull a figure out, 10,000 acres or hectares of
Yeah.
development. But it's always the shit land. It's
Yeah.
always the shit land, which is, as you're saying now, the koalas don't, because of our changing climate, we can't,
Yeah.
even if we plant the right trees, and you'll know better than me. I remember learning that there were about a dozen or 18 koala feed
It's
tree
not true.
species, but
No.
how
No.
many are there?
Oh, hundreds.
That's what I would. That's what I would have
Yeah.
thought. But
Yeah. So,
that's what we were always told years ago, that there
I
were
know. Uh,
uh,
it's,
all these special eucalypts
yeah.
that we had to plant. But no, well, I'm glad
No.
it's far
No.
more.
Yeah.
So what you are doing is convincing people to add koala habitat to their agricultural operations. Have I got that pretty right?
They're coming to us,
Well,
Grant.
that's even better. Isn't that better?
We don't have to convince them. We are in the enviable position now where we have more properties to plant on than we have the time or the money or the resources to plant on every year. So we've got so many willing farmers who are coming to us and saying, I want to make my farm better for koalas. Where do you want to plant? And my heart sings when I hear this, because it almost gives me carte blanche. Now, it doesn't entirely. If I said, I want your best paddock and I want it all, they might say, ooh, hang on.
But you,
But
but
luckily,
but you don't need it all, do you?
no, luckily,
No.
what I can say to them is, what's your worst land? What's your troublesome land? And are you using this river? And they go, actually, no, it's a source of weeds, nothing but trouble for us. And I say, well, let's fence it off. Can you give me 50 metres either side? And can we re-veg?
Hmm.
Now, they can't always manage 50 metres either side. That's a big ask.
Hmm.
But hey, you've got to start with the big
But,
when
but
you're negotiating, and then work
but
down to the small. But
but also, I mean, I love talking to you, Janine, because it makes me remember back to, when I was doing garden design and larger landscape design, doing farm plans, irrigation plans. If you can get a farmer involved like that, often you can convince them to maybe run a ring main or a main from one water source to another along this corridor. You don't need to go 50 metres constantly across
no,
along a
no.
creek frontage or something. What you can do is have areas where it comes out 50 metres and you get a large area of
Yeah.
habitat, but then you link
Yeah.
that to the next bit so that they've
Yeah.
still got area to crop and graze,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that you've got worthwhile and significant chunks of habitat. It's all about thinking beyond straight lines and whatnot. So it's really
Yeah.
really great. Now, what I
Yeah.
want to ask you, because you're centred your efforts in that western side of
Yeah.
Port Phillip Bay,
Yeah.
but there are koala friends groups, for want of a better term, through northern New South Wales, Western Sydney, the southeast of Queensland, the Scenic Rim area. Are other people following the model that you have established? That obviously, if farmers are saying yes, we coming to you and saying we want to be involved, is that happening in the other parts of Australia, especially where they're under greater pressure from not only climate change but from development, where they're losing their habitat?
Yes. Yeah. The short answer is yes. So one thing I set up with a friend in the koala community in about 2017 is a group called Wild Koala Day, which is a group of koala friends groups who are all interested in promoting the values of koalas, living in the wild. And one of the things that came up right at the start, because I was starting our tree planting program, was that a lot of groups were interested in planting trees for koalas on private land. And so the numbers of groups that have started doing this has just grown and grown and grown over the last few years. One of my great mates, Linda at Bangalore Koalas in northern New South Wales, has just exceeded 200,000 trees planted. And she started, I think, in 2017 or 2018. So the hunger for this kind of project on private land in northern New South Wales is enormous. It's even larger than ours down here, but she's also got a much longer planting season.
Yeah, good on you, Linda. Can I be grumpy, Grant, for a minute?
Why?
Right. So we've got a model now that works, right? That landholders want to be involved in. It works in that people want to participate and people are willing to surrender, for want of a better term, part of their property to be involved.
Yeah.
Why? This is my grumpy bit. Why doesn't the government see that, take that, and work some kind of financial incentive in to that portion of the farm, just like you're working from home tax credit, right? It just seems bonkers that we're always bashing our heads against the wall. Oh, we can't get any money. We could fund all this work just by doing something that we do. You can claim 20% or whatever it is of your floor space if you're working from home, and you can claim 5% of your heating or whatever on your tax return, but a farmer can't get any financial incentive and reward for contributing to the national estate. Far more than any government is doing now. It's ridiculous, and it makes me grumpy. What do you think, folks in the audience? Is Grumpy Grant on the right track? Hello, Mon, by the way.
I couldn't agree more. It's Costa Rica pays its farmers to revegetate.
Yeah, and I know, and look, you probably know quite well, Janine, that a lot of people who are farmers in the urban fringes are actually deriving most of their income from other sources, and that the agricultural part of their household tax arrangements is a bit of a scam, and at least we should be able to get positive contributions as a country from these operations, apart from reducing the tax take. There's my real grumpy thing. Hey, in the audience too, by the way, can you just in the comments let us know whereabouts you're from so we can get an idea of Jeff's in Brisbane. We know that. Where are you from, Mon? And Twitch and Facebook. Just let us know where you're from. We don't know if we're just talking to Victoria here or here we are. We're Mon. Mon has koalas in her backyard in North Brisbane.
Used to have.
Yeah, it used to have 2 spots. Okay. Do you want to read that one out, Janine?
Yeah, Mon says she's so sad. Used to have them in her backyard in North Brisbane. I hear this so often, Grant. I only see them at 2 particular spots now that I keep secret, except to show pics to council and to check that they're healthy. We're hearing this, Grant, all over Australia, in Victoria as well. Jeff has just said same, used to live in Kallangur. Is that how you say it?
Kalanga.
It was unusual to go for a walk.
Up on the northern outskirts of Brisbane, or that's probably right in the middle. When I lived in Brisbane, Kalanga was on the outskirts.
I know, and what frustrates me, Grant, is that it's left to grassroots groups to do a lot of this work. I mean, between us and Bangalore Koalas, we've planted nearly 300,000 trees in the last 3 or 4 years. And that says to me that if tiny grassroots groups can do this, governments should be doing 100 times more.
This is the thing that makes me so angry. We have all these clowns, and Tanya Plibersek, so far you're still bozo to me, but every state's got a environment or conservation department, but they're wedged in with agriculture and planning usually, and they don't go together, right? And agriculture can go with it if we just, like you're showing the way it can happen, but they just abrogated their responsibilities. The Howard government did it with land care. Let's not do anything. Let's just let land care be the solution to everything. Now, I'm not knocking land care. Land care is amazing,
great.
But that should be running alongside really significant efforts by government, and the governments have all stepped back. And it's not an Australian problem as well. It's worldwide problem. So mine's near Launton. Okay, well, Launton's not far from Hurston and whatnot, I think. Is that right, Mon? You'll be able to tell me. And Janice, hello Janice, nice to see you on Facebook. Gold Coast. Well, here we go. We've got a lot of people in Queensland who obviously care deeply about the situation with the koalas. So
it's very frustrating. Groups like ours have trouble getting government funding, Grant.
Well, that was my next question. Let me ask the next question. Where does the money for your activities come from?
I would love to say that the federal government just halved the defence budget and gave the rest to biodiversity, but no, that's not where it comes from. That $36 billion annually that they spend on defending our country is not enough, it appears. So they don't fund the grassroots groups, who are the ones that really know their local conditions and do such a great job on the ground. We get most of our funding from the corporate world. Companies are very interested in improving their image, in investing in good projects, in coming out and planting trees themselves with their own hands and putting that in their, shareholder report or on their social media. And I've got to say, the 82-year-old lady named Gloria, and you can extend that, to 62-year-olds named Christine, and all of these sort of age groups of people, of ordinary people. We couldn't do it without them. It's not the billionaires that are doing it for us. It's the ordinary people who just feel so strongly about doing something positive for this earth, and particularly for koalas. These are the people we rely on entirely, Grant.
How many? What's the size in terms of individuals that you have built into your network? And this is your opportunity to give a shout out to all the people who are working in your nursery. Tell us about all the operations that you've got going, and all the kinds of people who contribute. Let's give all the heroes a bit of recognition here.
Yes. There's over 2,000 of them in our database who come out with us or contribute regularly in some way, Grant. About 100 of those are members, and they're the ones who are often coming out at every single tree planting or every second one. Some of them are donors who are overseas and wish they could be involved. But they are involved. I mean, as soon as you make a donation, of course, it's critical to have funding for this kind of thing. I've got a small staff of 6. So during the tree planting season is when we have the most staff working. We had our whole team together yesterday doing a last final planting of the season. And we are working in a little nursery here at my place, which is 7,000 trees. So we're working there usually a couple of days a week, and then during the tree planting season, we're on site sometimes 4 times a week, planting 1,000 trees at least every single day. So 4,000 trees a week. We get through them really, really fast. And this year we planted 27,460 in 3 months, which is our very short planting window is winter down here in Western Victoria. And it's hard to get them all in that time. But this is where the corporate groups are so fantastic. They'll come out on a weekday. They'll bring their whole team, and the company pays for them to have a work day out volunteering, but they also pay us to host them for that. And this is just terrific for us because it does 2 things. It helps us with our funding, and it also helps us get the trees in the ground.
All right, well, there's 2 things I want to follow up with. Planting season is over just about now. So does that mean that the 2 positions that are advertised on the on the website for people to work for the foundation, does that mean that those applications will probably open up again next year?
Yeah, it does actually.
Okay, so
yes.
and I just wanted to point that out so that you don't get inundated in the next 3 months with a whole lot of resumes and applications that you can't actually act on until next year.
However, I'm always interested to hear from people because we are growing so fast. So, yes, I still wouldn't mind getting a resume or 2.
Okay, good. Okay, well, now let's do something I don't do very often on this show, Janine. Let's give a shout out to the corporate supporters. Are you able to identify some of the companies that are corporate heroes for koalas?
Yeah, I can. So a group called Global NTT came out twice with us this season. The Social Research Centre that do social research for ANU, they came out with 27 people, which was fantastic. A bar in Melbourne called Bar Clara put out the word to their own staff, but also all the bars around them in Collins Street, and it did a fantastic corporate day there, which was simply terrific. We didn't start until a bit later in the day because bar staff, the poor devils, they have late nights.
That's right.
And thus late mornings. So that was fantastic. We had a group called Red Cat who came out, and Bupa, the insurance company, and Hewlett Packard Australia. They sent a couple of groups out too. Oh, and then we've got Moose Toys. Oh, they were so much fun.
Moose Toys. Well, just before we go on with that, Mon, it's really sad. Mon's just made the point that some of the mature eucalypts in her area are becoming really bare. we've got a whole lot of pressures. We've got a lack of water. We've got dieback, which has really fallen off the agenda, but there is that's what is it? Phytophthora cinnamomi, the fungal root rot that happens to a lot of eucalypts, particularly after floods that we've been having over the years. So there's a whole lot of stresses on these trees, and that's why they. It's often not very apparent what the reason is for their decline. And some trees just get over mature, and if we haven't allowed a natural recruitment of new trees in the area, well then there's no new habitat. But let's get back to that singing the praises of all the people being involved. Now this again highlights how governments have walked away from responsibility for doing these things. I'm guessing that most of these corporate activities in different companies, the genesis of those is in the lunchrooms and whatnot, where people who care about koalas talk to their work friends, and instead of doing a jeans, casual Friday wearing jeans or something, they think, well, let's actually do something that makes a difference. And they all get together, and then it might not be koalas, but it'll be some activity that they go and support. And this is where we've let governments walk away from their responsibilities in every field. But the stuff I care about is biodiversity and conservation and birds, obviously. And I just get so frustrated that we are not supporting the groups. Good on these companies, Let's support them. Let's go to Red Cat and what was it? Cafe Clara, Bar Clara, Bar Clara. Yep. If you're in Melbourne, get in and check them out. What do you? Are you reaching out actively to more corporates, and the other untapped pool of enthusiasm is schools and other clubs and societies. So are they finding you too?
Yeah, they are. I've got to say though, adults are better planters.
Yeah.
So while we do work with schools, it tends to be much better for the upper age levels, and university students are terrific. That's just a perfect fit for us, is university age. Look, little kids love it, Grant, but the plants don't love it as much, I must say.
Yeah. I remember in my days of organising land care, planting days and weekends, and the survival rate wasn't often real flash. Sometimes there was a trade-off that you willingly made. You'd give them the Lomandras and the Danthonias to plant, and not the Bursarias.
Yeah. So. Oh, Bursaria. That is such an important plant, Grant. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, especially I wanted to say something about them before with these riparian, river corridors. They're so important, and what a habitat plant for birds and insects.
Because I really believe that if you're trying to preserve a large mammal like a koala, you have to start at the very beginning, which is insects, and look after the insects. Because a large mammal like a koala needs everything to be working perfectly, in the food web. And the only way to make sure that happens is to really look after all of the small things first. So we plant a lot of daisies, a lot of everlastings, a lot of salt bushes. Naturally, our environment calls for them because we work in mostly grassy woodlands. And so that suits us. There would be other examples in other parts of Australia. And sweet
Let,
bursaria is a plant that used to be much more prevalent in our landscape. Has
let, let,
beautiful white flowers. Insects love it.
let me ask: are you using Alerias and Divisias and plants like that in the You Yangs and Brisbane Rangers corridor?
We don't have many of those actually in our
So what
landscape.
what are those small shrubs that are sort of hip height, chest height that fill that layer because the bursarias get taller and do the next sort of layer in the in the mosaic of habitat.
Well, Grant, in most of our plantings, there wasn't a hip level layer. It was grassland and very small everlastings. So
Okay.
things like podolepis,
Yep.
and I'm just trying to think of some name, Leptorhynchus, the
Yep.
little scaly
Yep.
buttons,
Yep.
Vitidinia, the tiny little woolly New Holland daisy,
Have
and
you got
then
craspedias on that far
Craspedia,
wide? Yeah. The little
the
billy
beautiful
buttons.
billy
Yeah.
buttons, and ruby saltbush, nodding saltbush, those sort of things. So really, really low. And then beside the river itself, in quite a thin strip, um, then we start to get into the tree violet, the Malicytus, river bottlebrush, or similar tea trees and things, Bursaria. Uh, we did get some spots of she oak, so Alocasia, out on
Which
the plains.
which one have you got over there? Is it
We've got
littoralis?
3. Littoralis lemannii here in Ballyang, which is the bull oak.
Yep.
It's a strange, long way from its other occurrences. And then verticillata, so the drooping she oak in some spots, especially the drier sites.
Hey, Janine, pump up my tyres and read Mon's comment.
Yeah, I agree too. Yeah.
Mon, Mon said Grumpy Grant is on the right track. Well, I'm glad.
Mm, mm.
Sometimes I think people get very, very sick of Grumpy Grant, but Grumpy Grant's not going away until the clowns with the money and the power do their jobs. Do your bloody job. That's
Yeah,
all I want to say.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
now, look, we're really going, inside baseball here a little bit, but uh, with with those habitats that you are building,
Mm,
because that's really
mm.
what you're doing. You're rebuilding habitat
Yes, exactly.
rather than repairing it, because these are habitats that have been totally altered on farmland, on those highly intensively farmed, grazed generally in that um, part of the world. I don't think there's a lot of cropping on that side. Is
There
there
is a
on those
bit.
river flats?
There is a bit now. I'm looking at fields and fields of canola at the moment, out there on the Ballyang Plains. So, but a combination of barley, canola, wheat, and sheep is mostly what we're working with around here.
Okay. So
Mm.
I was just wondering whether, there's a couple of species of grevillea that live
Yeah,
in that particular
yeah,
section of the western fringes of
yeah,
Port Phillip
yeah.
Bay. So are you in your nursery? Have you managed to get some cuttings or some seeds of some remnant grevilleas, and are you able to pop them back into the habitat somewhere, or are they, because
Yeah,
they're on
yeah.
that sort of rocky
Yep.
on the rocky slope? So are you able to get those into the mosaic?
Yes. So mostly the rosemary grevillea, the Rosemarinifolia.
Yep.
There was a dwarf form down here at Lara. I don't know if I
Yeah.
can get that though. I haven't found it. But you should see our species list, Grant.
Well,
You would absolutely love it.
well,
Every
we
single one of our properties, we prepare a species list based on its exact site. So it's not general, it's really, really specific. And we're usually planting 35 to 43 species on each of our plantings, and no two are ever the same.
Can I let you in on a bit of a secret? Janine?
Yeah.
In October, as in a couple of days, the Bird Emergency gets a sister or brother show and Twitter account, Habitat Gardening with Grant.
Ooh.
And Gardens for Habitat is the
Nice.
new Twitter handle. So
Nice.
I'll be extremely interested to know about those particular plant lists and maybe reach out and talk to the people who are running those, because this is what we have to do. We need to, this just needs to get done. Pull your finger.
Can I just say one word?
Yes.
But saltbush.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I love these things.
And what an amazing plant that that can be grazed in hard times, can bounce back.
Little berries get eaten by so many birds and small reptiles. We see the importance of it. There's one here in the Brisbane Ranges called Saloop, which is Inadia hastata, and I see entire flocks of crimson rosellas feeding on it when it's got the teeniest fruits.
And even doves, have you got any of the doves apart from the bronzewings and the crested pigeon?
Two sorts of bronzewings here. We've got brush,
you've got both of them,
as well
brush
as
and common.
And common. And once upon a time, we would have had more peaceful doves in southern Australia, more diamond doves and things eating these things.
Well, I was wondering whether you might have had either as occasional visitors to that side.
Not anymore. No. Maybe occasionally. I think they probably sneak in every now and again. But I think there's a lot of talk about grasslands. There's a lot of talk about forests and rainforests, but there's this in-between stage called grassy woodland that Victoria has lost 99% of it.
Yep.
And it's horrific because this is one of our most biodiverse, animal-rich environments in the whole of Australia. And so many of our birds rely on it. Koalas rely on it.
And reptiles.
Reptiles
too. Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating, because most of it was good farmland. And this is where it all comes back to local groups like us working with their local farmers. I mean, the reason, Grant, that we've got so many projects on the go now is because we've had enough time for the farmers to trust us. They've talked to each other. They pass on our name to each other. And I don't know what they say, but it must be positive, because it means that we get more and more phone calls where people are self-selecting. They already want to work with us. And it's just a matter of negotiating how.
So let's see what's the next step. We know what you're doing and what you've been achieving. So let's dream big. Dream big, Janine. What's where do you want to take Koala Clancy Foundation in the next? Let's put 5 years on it. Let's get past this term of government and into the next one.
Oh, well, we're going to revegetate the whole Little River. And we're going to do the same for the Barwon and the Moorabool. So from the sort of forest edge down to the suburban edge, we're going to do all those three rivers. Now, that is our core area. So we don't want to expand outside of that.
Yep. So,
that's a big enough project.
so and I mean that I'm guessing that you would help someone who wanted to replicate your plan in other parts of the state and the country with ideas on how it can be done. Now, if you're looking at like the Barwon River, the Little River, that tells me that you've got local landowners involved, you've got the catchment management group involved,
Mm-hmm.
you must have local land care groups involved,
Yep.
and you must have local councils involved,
Yes.
and you must have the State Department and maybe
well, less so.
But they'd have to be supportive though, wouldn't they? Because you've got to get, if you're going to get access to all the land, or is it all privately held pretty much in those catchments?
Melbourne Water are very supportive. And they're the critical one for the Little River. And outside of their area, the catchment management authorities, I suppose, handle that side of things.
All the tributaries and whatnot, because that's where you need to you need to go out on the tributaries, don't you? And the little the little soaks and runoffs, and
those are so important. Those little drainage lines, because but in terms of state government support, I see a real deficit there. I'm disappointed with the state government level of support for koalas generally.
All mammals, and unless they can be bred in a zoo and shown off at a photo op,
yeah, exactly. I think they have perpetuated an illusion that our koalas are fine, our kookaburras are fine, everything's absolutely fine in Victoria. And if we don't do any research to prove ourselves wrong, we can keep on saying that they're fine. And that's not good enough. You know, when there's no research going on to prove or disprove these theories, you can't just keep saying it's fine. I'm sorry, it's not fine.
We all know it's not fine, you know.
No.
And that's, you know, people are mentioning it all the time. We were just having a discussion again yesterday, both on Twitter and also on a stream we did last night, that there are, well, you mentioned kookaburras. When I first came to this area, I did sometimes see kookaburras, not regularly, but sometimes they would be in the park. I haven't seen one for 6 years, probably.
See, the common species have got to be looked after. I mean, as much as the rare.
Well, if the adaptable species are disappearing, I mean, that was my whole rationale for the bird emergency. I don't know if I told you, but you know, I noticed that sparrows were becoming less common around me, and that was what got me thinking. And then a little bit of research, and you find out that birds everywhere are disappearing. Well, if birds are disappearing, well, then everything's probably disappearing. Mon, you said something in your second last comment. I don't know what you're referring to with that. Is it a brand name? Just give us an idea of what you are talking about there. Sorry, podcast listeners, but this is the audio version of the live stream. You should always come along to the live streams at thebirdemergency.com/live, or on Facebook or YouTube or Twitch. And by the way, subscribe on YouTube. That's the current goal. I need some more subscribers on YouTube so that I can unlock the community part of YouTube and be better able to let everyone know what's happening and to tie you all in too. Because you're more likely to be going on YouTube or Facebook than you are coming to thebirdemergency.com, I find out. And I'm only doing it so that you can all get to know each other and help each other out. That's the whole point of doing it. Boffins with people with gumboots and people with surveying gear and shovels and, you know, everyone's got to be part of the army, don't they?
Yeah.
The only good army.
Yeah, exactly.
So how far advanced are you planning on the Little River and Barwon River projects? Tell us about those. Like the scope of it must be amazing. How many trees? Let's start with this. How many trees are you going to need?
Really a lot. Um, we've actually planted a quarter of the Little River already, which staggered me, I must say, because the extent of it, which I wanted to plant, is from just outside Little River Township. So we don't plant in townships because it's not great for koalas. There's too many roads. But from just outside the Little River Township through to the Brisbane Ranges, we figured out many years ago that we wanted to plant all of that. And it's just been a slow sort of putting the pieces of the jigsaw in. As landowners have gotten involved with us more and more, we've planted a lot of trees. I think around about 30,000 along the Little River already. This is our first main river that's very close to our heart, because the Yuyangs is right next to the Little River. And so this is the first course for our Yuyangs koalas is to get into the Little River and help them get through those hot summers.
Okay, Mon, I just put up your comment about looking for an ethical superannuation fund. Ethical and sustainable and things like that are really difficult terms when we're talking about corporate bodies. Often they'll do something that is really good while continuing to do things that aren't good. I'm not making any reflection on Bupa, but you need to really look into that. And there are particular people and bodies that know a lot about sustainable corporate partners and whatnot. So, actually, one place I will refer you, might be controversial, but check out on YouTube Friendly Geordies. This is one of his crusades and passion projects. The koala is his main conservation concern, and he has looked into very deeply the banks and other corporate entities that we all have to be involved with, like superannuation. Everyone has to be involved in Australia, and everyone has to be banked pretty much to do anything. So he's actually done that work. Check out a lot of his videos. You'll see a lot of stuff there you don't like, whatever. But he's a hero for koalas in Western Sydney. So don't let the publicity and whatnot about him and them generally deter you. Someone who's actually using his clout. Using his clout for good, not for evil. So yeah, and genuinely, he has done the work on what makes an ethical and a biodiversity friendly company in Australia. So
it's so interesting to me how much more sensitive companies are to reputation damage, and therefore much easier to perhaps change their course on an issue than governments. We're seeing all the time, companies who are willing to talk about climate change and divesting from fossil fuels all over the world, including insurance companies, and still governments are not changing. So maybe that's a better path for some of us.
Well, yeah. Look, again, Grumpy Grant just can't help coming out. I'm always railing.
I bring him out.
No. Everything I see and hear brings him out. But it's so frustrating when you can see there is the last election proved in the way that people were prepared to ditch generations of habitual voting patterns to to affect change, and that if you know better than I do these days, I'm not in the corporate world anymore and dealing with companies day to day anymore. But in my experience in the past, people were more likely to hide something than face something and really go for it. Now, if you're telling me that corporates reaching out to you are looking to change and looking to promote their own and trumpet their own change, it's so frustrating when the people with all the money are still not getting on board with it. And by all the money, I mean the government. The government's got all the money. So,
well, one thing I find really bothersome, Grant, is when corporate entities are expected to function at a certain level, and then a government organisation like Vic Forests or New South Wales Forestry, which should be setting the bar, they should be leading by example, and doing the best practice. And they're the ones who are being sued in court for illegal operations, and they're government entities. And special
legislation protects them.
And this is wrong. To expect the corporate world to achieve higher standards than the government's is completely wrong, as far as I'm concerned. Let's hold them to account. It's not good enough, Vic Forests.
Let's go back to that in just a minute. Mon's made a couple of points that I want to follow up. Part of this connecting all the interested groups is really important, and why Janine, you've come into this from your, activities running tours. People who are interested in Australian animals, birds, and habitat and the landscape coming here, and that has grown into a conservation outcome. Mon's made a point about riparian corridors being great for photographers and people wanting to take. Mon's talking about macro photography. So that's taking photos of flowers and leaves and insects and stones and rocks rather than the long lens taking photos of colourful birds. So there's a whole new sector of people who are interested, which is great. Now, we were talking about bone seed before, but as you go north, lantana is the weed that needs to be controlled, or one of. Smilax. Think back in time remember when blackberries were the biggest weed issue we had, and gorse bush in Victoria, prickly pears, which are making a comeback in Queensland. There are lots and lots of weeds where lots and lots of groups can get involved and make the same kind of difference for a lot of animals. Actually, I'll get a plug in here too. The page will be up later today working, but the list of all the citizen science projects like the Cane Toad Challenge, ridding dams of toadlets and the prickly pears, and that's on thebirdemergency.com/CITSCIOZ. CITSCIOZ. So that page will be live later in the day with the list of bucket loads of citizen science projects you can get involved in if you aren't able to come and pull out weeds with Janine. Now where were we? Let's get back to that point about governments allowing their own operations to act outside the law that other big bodies can't. And look, seriously, I'm going to put this one out there. Tanya Plibersek and all the state premiers and conservation ministers, can you just get together and buy back every one of the assets that is operating under regional forest agreements, set up a 5 or 10 year plan, compensate the people in the industries, get them into something else, and it'll be a lot cheaper than the money that you gave, not you specifically, Labor government, but that the government gave to Harvey Norman in job seeker payments that they didn't need. If you got that back, you could solve the issue tomorrow. The industry is not $18 billion big.
No.
Right? So the problems are solvable, and it's just, look, I'm going to swear, it's just shithouse. It's not good enough, and the fact that you can make announcements about the power industry and look to and AGL, today bringing forward closing Loy Yang. Fantastic movements. Can you just do it with these stupid regional forest agreements? And people do not have to suffer. Nobody is a wheelwright anymore. Cobb and Co went out of business. Actually, they're running buses around. The brand exists. But, nobody's making cars with running boards anymore. These industries are dead. They're finished. Logging native habitat in Australia is a dead industry. Get out of it.
Yeah.
Stop it. Pay off everyone who needs to be paid off, and they can go and have a new life doing something else.
Yep.
Okay.
And you're quite right. Industries die. I mean, the Australian government was quite happy to let tourism die during COVID, and they didn't care at all. It generates more than fishing, agriculture, and mining combined in places like East Gippsland. Tourism. And that's not even a big tourism region. It's an enormous employer of Australians, and they were happy to let it die simply because we don't have massive lobby groups that take them out for lunch, So I agree with you. Whenever the government says there's not enough money to do this, I think BS. There is plenty of money going to the wrong things.
And the Australian government can print Australian dollars to pay Australians to do stuff. They don't need to borrow it. All this is rubbish. All the arguments are rubbish. Protecting people who benefit at the top end of the scale on activities which are detrimental to all of us. Cutting down habitat, doesn't matter whether it's forest or woodland or heathland or mangrove swamps or anything you want to look at, that has a detrimental effect now on us, and we all know it. We all know it. This is a frustrating
thing. It's so important to me because we are planting trees down here simply because someone cut the trees down 100 years ago.
That's right.
Now, in Queensland, in some of the newer agricultural districts, they're cutting them down now.
That's right.
Now, it will save everyone a lot of heartache if you simply protect the ones
what
that
we
stand.
Have. That's the point I continue making, Janine. It's like I don't want to blame anyone, right? I don't want to tell people that they can't make money out of their activities or whatnot. Let's find a way to make farming profitable without destroying whatever is left, because we're down to the last 10%, And so the magnitude of damage, every hectare that is removed every time becomes greater and greater simply because there's nothing left to fall back on. So it just seems crazy to me that we've got thousands of people just involved in your efforts, Janine. Thousands.
I know.
And there's maybe 50 koala interest groups around the country. If every one of them has got 500 people interested, that's a huge amount of people who are trying to replace stuff and they're not keeping up with
No.
with the damage
No.
being done between two large bulldozers and a chain. That's
I
still
know.
happening in Queensland and New South Wales. In
And in
critical habitat, this box
mm,
woodland
mm,
and these open
mm,
woodland habitats.
that's right.
Not
And in the
that.
Northern Territory,
Yep.
and it's not koala, of course, but and of course in Victoria, there's still native forest logging, which
Yeah.
and I think there are times when a society has to say, you know what,
That's it.
there
That's
has to
enough.
be a stop.
Yep. We're at
Now,
that point. We're at that
and
point.
you could
People
argue that we
people
were
can
at
be as
that point 10
radical as they
years
like
ago.
now, I reckon. Yeah, well,
I agree.
the time we should have done something was 10 years ago. But I think that movement that you're talking about in society,
Yeah.
I think we're at it, and I don't think the government has worked it out yet. But I don't think they've worked it out. That people are now at the point where we're going, you know what? I've had enough of you and all the ones like you. And well, I just noticed, actually, again, sorry, international listeners. By the way, I did want to point out, international listeners, the little river that Janine is talking about is the little river of the Little River Band. So, and the story is, it's not that they came from down there or anything. No, they were driving to a gig when they were called something else, and they saw the sign over the freeway that said the turn off to Little River, and someone just went, Little River. Oh, that's good. Little River Band. That's as complicated as the story is. But yes, it is the same Little River. But where was I going on that? Where was I, Janine? I was.
It's a good question. We were just changing. We were changing the world. So.
Yeah. I was going to tell you what I saw this morning on my walk around with the dog. By the way, when I do the dog walk and I notice what the first bird I see and the first bird I heard, hashtag first seen and heard. On my walk this morning, I know the family that live in the house, a nice Vietnamese family, or Vietnamese, I think second gens, on the front fence, Victorian socialist signs.
Cool.
I haven't seen that in this part of my part of Melbourne. So I think that people who are natural supporters of the current state government are actually looking for options so that they don't have to put the other side in, but they don't have to keep supporting the poor practices. And forest logging is one of the touchstone issues. What have we got? Mons contributing. Let me just get through. Maybe suburb of Launton. I'm not sure what Mon's referring to, but Launton. Launton's in that area, sort of out the northern inner area of Brisbane. I think on the up on the main road out of town. I think. Anyway, that's. And there we go. I agree with you, Mon. YouTube is great. And actually, if you are a podcast listener, the podcasts are a long way behind where the interviews are on YouTube. When I do them, they go straight into YouTube and they sit there. And if you want to keep up with all the people I'm talking to, subscribe to the Bird Emergency on YouTube. That is my advice. Janine, what should someone do if they want to be involved with Koala Clancy Foundation?
If they're local to us, so if they're Victorians, just come out once. I want to see the look on your face that I see on our volunteers' faces every single day. It's so satisfying to know you're doing something that's really good. You also get to see some gorgeous country that's normally not allowed for the public because it's all private land on some of our most important heritage rivers, really. It's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. You meet amazing people. But if you can't do that, or if you don't think it's going to suit you, you can certainly donate. It actually costs $10 to plant a tree in Australia, and make sure it will survive. Now, that's a really big difference with us. You will see some groups who will say $1 to plant a tree.
No,
All that bought was the
doesn't.
seedling.
That's right. That doesn't take into account that. Actually, let's explore this, because I used to plant trees. I used to grow thousands of plants. Let's explore what a tree planting actually means. So how do you prepare the ground?
Well, I even start a bit earlier than that. So we're starting to prepare for next winter now. We're starting to prepare for the funding, to prepare the species lists, and to order the trees, because you have to order 9-10 months in advance, as you would recall, to get the kind of commercial quantities that we need.
I would even be thinking it maybe more. I would be thinking 2 years out. You've got to, because the seed's got to be collected, right? So that's another lead time, and for the quantities you want, that might take 2 or 3 years for the seed collectors to get the quantity that's needed, because there's not only you wanting to do it, there's all the other koala groups wanting it too. And if you're well, let's talk about this. Are you always trying to source Indigenous seed? And if you can't, you have to compromise, don't you? That you'll get the next closest lot that you can.
There's some arguments that you should mix in a few that are slightly more remote, with your local provenance seed, and I think that makes sense. We work with a fantastic organisation called Seeding Victoria. They are a tiny team, but they go out and they source local provenance seed from all over the western side over here of Victoria, and they sell it to us at a tiny price. It should be more for what they do. But at the moment, we're talking with them about Melbourne yellow gum, which is an endangered tree that grows in our area here, that should be in more re-veg projects, but it's hard to get the seed.
Now, Melliodora, Eucalyptus Melliodora?
Yeah. No, that's yellow box. So this one's Leucoxylon subspecies.
Sorry. Yeah.
But Melliodora is hard as well.
Yeah.
Now these are important, enormous canopy trees that people don't realise how hard it is to get seed, because they won't set seed every year.
That's right.
And there's no register of where they are setting seed, you know?
Look, see, this has been a really useful discussion, I think, Janine, in that we've, between the two of us, picked up so many of the issues that make this work difficult and challenging. And it means that, and remember, every time the government saves money, they take people out of the field. They take, and they go, we probably don't need those people in the department anymore, because we could subcontract our seed collection to Seeding Victoria or someone like that. And then all of a sudden, while the government think they're covering one side of what needs to be done, they're taking the resource away from someone like you, because they're saving money by subcontracting. It's all,
and they're pushing it onto volunteers a lot of the time.
That's right.
Which really bothers me as well.
And of course, now half the people who volunteer have probably had their job changed into 2 or 3 part-time jobs or some kind of gig job over the last 5 years. So nothing's moving in the right direction in the government and societal way, is it? But we're all making the efforts we can in the ways we can, and they're not tuned into it.
Australians are fantastic volunteers, Grant. They are really, really good. And I think all of us do a bit of volunteering for all the right reasons. But I don't like it when organisations use volunteering as an economic management system.
No,
that is
it's
cynical.
totally
and
sucks. It's
and
wrong. It's
it's
unethical.
really
Worse
wrong.
than cynical.
Yeah.
It's unethical.
So don't use us, don't exploit us. Acknowledge us for sure. Volunteering is fantastic, but
and take the extra bonus that volunteer activities provide, but don't make it a cornerstone of your activities. And that's what governments are doing now.
Sadly.
Just look at how they deliver aid, like food aid and everything. Everyone goes, oh, well, what we'll do, we'll give some money to some churches, and they can do it, right?
Yeah.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
Bullshit. You want to house the homeless? Build some houses yourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Or force the planning laws to.
That's right.
So there are. So I think it's really important that we have volunteers out there doing fantastic work. But I also think it's important to create paying jobs in industries like re-veg. And so the reason we ask for $10 donation for each tree is that we pay our nurseries. They deserve to be paid. We pay
those
for
nurseries have to survive. I mean,
I know.
they're not getting cheap pots from some multinational plastic company. They're not getting cheap. You're not getting free steaks and free wind guards and free mulch and free potting mix in your nursery. No one's volunteering to give you 20 cubic meters of premium native potting mix.
They're not.
No one's dropped off 100 kilos of vermiculite for free, have they?
And people often ask us that, but the thing is, these organisations that supply these things, all of their clients are not-for-profits. And so they couldn't possibly run their organisation if they were donating all of their products all the time.
Of course not. But here's the disconnect too. Let's just say that Debco, for want of any horticultural supplier, let's just say Debco did want to give you 100 cubic metres of soil, of potting media.
Where am I going to put it?
But even if they did, that's a tax write-off for them, right? So there's a benefit for them, but there's no benefit for the people who end up doing the work. No one gets any kind of economic inducement to do the important work. It's all us about.
I think people in the not-for-profit sector often get accused of doing it for money. And there's this idea that because you're working on something that's good, that you shouldn't get paid as much as someone who's in the regular corporate world.
Well, it's the biggest load of crap.
Or that you shouldn't get paid at all. I really dispute that.
Why should someone doing admin for your foundation get paid less than someone who's producing a brochure for whatever in an office somewhere? Why should someone in a real estate company who's producing brochures to sell houses be paid more than somebody coordinating a planting day in your foundation? The whole ideas are ludicrous.
And I see this all the time because I work on activism a lot, and that's something else I was going to talk to you about. But and a lot of my friends in the koala community are activists. And we find,
and you're so good at it. You guys in the koala, and I don't mean you particularly, Janine, although I do mean you particularly. Right. But the Koala Network in the last year or two has done a fantastic job of lifting the profile.
I agree.
But not only standing on the sidelines and squawking, but doing shit, getting shit done, and then being able to turn around and say, hey, this is what we've done. Help us out more, and get involved.
What's the biggest problem for us, Grant, in this space is volunteer burnout.
Yeah.
Because the people we're up against are highly paid lawyers, lobbyists, and
Lobbyists. Yep.
advisors.
Yep.
Now,
Yep.
when they start to get tired, they can move on to another job or have their 4 weeks of leave or whatever they have. I've got nothing against them doing that, but we don't get that.
Actually, I do. Actually, and no, and let me tell you why. You've got a choice. You don't have to work for a shit company or do shit things anymore. You just don't have to do it. And I remember having a Twitter discussion, I think, with Elaine from EDO, I think, where they took but there was the talk about when you're a lawyer or when you're an accountant, when you whatever, and I learnt this stuff personally in my own life. You can't walk out the door to go to work and leave your ethics on the kitchen table. And if you do, you're not on my team. And I'm not on your team.
I agree, but I think we also need to allow people time to grow and to learn.
Yes.
I've done things in the past that I am not proud of.
Absolutely, me too.
And I think we all have. And so I think if you keep on doing that kind of thing, yes. What you're saying is absolutely valid.
Let's clarify it because it was in the context of someone going, well, I know that the firm's working for some pretty shit people, but I've got to pay the bills. No. Change your life, change things, or change your firm, or find a different firm. You don't have to be the one doing the shit work. If you know that what you're doing is damaging, this is why I get really angry with some corporate sectors that aren't moving for change.
Yeah.
No one needs to convince you.
Can I give you a personal example? Something that
I thought you were going to give me some personal advice.
No, certainly wouldn't. I don't think you need any personal advice from me, Grant.
I reckon I need a shitload of personal advice, Janine.
One thing that really bothers my industry is hardwood stakes. Hardwood stakes are the best when you're dealing in rough, rocky ground.
Yep.
However, they are not sourced
sustainably. No, but they could be if the industry had have moved 15 years ago. We could have had a whole industry, sustainable industry, based around these products, and they refused to do it. Which is why I've got no sympathy if that sector of the industry goes to the wall, because you had the opportunity. The opportunities were pointed out to them. Years ago.
An organisation like mine, we've got this problem where we're dealing with very dry, very hard soils. We want to reuse products as much as we can, and we want our trees to survive. That's our main thing. But I don't believe in cutting down a tree over there to plant one here.
To plant one over here. It's nuts. It's exactly the point I make over and over and over again.
But you know what happens, and this goes back to our $10 per tree. The less you donate for a tree, the less you pay for a tree, the more likely that organisation is to choose an unsustainable choice.
Exactly.
Because they can't afford to choose the sustainable choice. They can't afford to ask the supplier, where did you source that stake? They can't afford to look at other options, and they can't afford to recycle. So we send teams out to pick up our stakes and our guards after 1 year for some of the smaller plants and after 2 years for the bigger plants. So we at least get a couple of years out of them. And at the moment, Grant, you'll be thrilled to hear this, there's been a new development in bamboo stakes with a square section that are almost as strong as a hardwood stake. We're transitioning to them at the moment, and I'm really looking forward to the day where there will be no more new hardwood stakes in our plantings. But this has not happened yet.
No, I have been waiting for maybe Malaysia or Vietnam or China to turn the plastic waste problem that they have, because remember, the whole world for 15 years has been sending them our plastic that we don't recycle. And I've been waiting for them to do something like, develop a plastic star picket, something like that, with the holes, so that you can then attach anything you need to, and that would replace all of the ways we use wood in horticulture. That recycled plastic could be used. Now, it's not as good as using bamboo if bamboo's an option, but there's a resource sitting there that we don't want to burn, right? Or we don't want people to bulldoze it into the ground, so that it could be used. But those developments never haven't happened yet. But another country will do it rather than rather than the Smorgans or the Pratts in Australia do it.
That's right. So anyway, look, I suppose my point was that sometimes you have to work within the system that you're presented with, and do everything you can to change it as soon as you can. I can see that there's a lot of people out there who like me, are trying to work within the system they have, not finding it satisfactory, but also don't know how to change it, how to make that next step. And I think we need to be very open to that. And things like volunteering are a fantastic way of seeing alternative approaches to things.
And let's just talk a bit about volunteering. And if you haven't been a volunteer before, and particularly if you're someone who's looking to develop skills and to do networking and to understand industries, volunteering is the way to do it. If you don't think you have any other options, if you didn't go to college, if you can't afford to retrain or whatever,
you did,
or even if you want to pivot, volunteering's a way to do it.
Guess how I get all my staff?
That's right. You find the people who are actually doing it, come and do it for you, and you notice all their other skills. They don't have to apply for a job. They're doing it every time they turn up and help out. If you're listening, and it doesn't have to be for Koala Clancy, if you're interested in doing something and you're interested in stuff, go and find a way to be involved in stuff. And
actually, that it's something you mentioned earlier. Is that my advice for anyone around the rest of Australia is, don't help us. Help your local group.
Help the local group. That was going to be the next thing I went to. How to? I'm sure that you have some kind of informal network, or is there like a?
It's a formal network.
Okay, so let's talk about that so that people can chase down their local group.
Well, in our case, if it's koala related, the group is under the banner of Wild Koala Day. And it's only because that's what we came together to produce, is this National Day for Koalas. There's groups of our size, small, local, really high levels of knowledge and expertise in their local area. They deal with the issue that is biggest for koalas in their area. So it's wrong to ask me what trees to plant in Brisbane where Mon lives. Whereas it's right to ask the local group up there because they know. But also, tree planting may not be the right thing for your local area. It could be protecting trees, could be the most important thing. Around Sydney's suburbs around Campbelltown, protecting the existing habitat is far more important than planting trees.
That's right. And so the activism is more important than the actual volunteering, and the lobbying work on local councils and whatnot is extremely important in Sydney at the moment.
Yes, exactly. So, and so I would say go with their advice. Don't don't ask someone who's a well known or you've heard on a podcast. Go to your local group. They could probably do with a hand. They could probably do with a donation, I would bet.
Yeah. And apart from koala groups, there's Indigenous nurseries all over the country that need a hand.
Yeah.
There are, and if they don't need any labour, they'd certainly welcome $50, right?
Oh,
I mean, this is
always.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many ways to help, and if you're a professional, I mean, this is where I don't see enough giving. People need to do their books. They need help with tax advice for charities and foundations. They need legal advice.
Yep.
They need insurance brokers to find them good deals to cover all their activities. Yep. There are loads and loads of ways that you can help. If you have to go to work and wear a suit and sit on the 13th floor of an office in the city, hey, you can help. Probably using your skills right now.
I know groups that need plumbers. They need carpenters. They would adore a renovation of their koala hospital. And I mean, even though we were talking about volunteering,
you always
and how
need
people should
arborists.
Be paid, most of these groups just aren't particularly good at promoting themselves. They're not as good as the big groups at asking for money. And so you don't hear about them. You don't hear about their needs. But if you went to them and said, look, I'm skilled in social media marketing. Could I help? I imagine they would be thrilled. Or whatever it is that you happen to be skilled in. Give them a call and see if you can help. Definitely. And, you'll meet the best people, and you might even meet some koalas.
You might. You might indeed. Now, all right. Tell me what the is there a website for the Koala Network or what?
Yeah.
Tell me what that is.
It's just wildkoaladay.com.au, which is wildkoaladay.com.au, and you'll just see every year, May the 3rd, we have a big kind of event. We talk about current issues for koalas, and there's a bit about us, which talks about the groups that are involved in this. Now, we don't have any special agreement or anything like that. We just all do our own thing and help each other. And that's a lovely way for groups to keep their own, what's the word? Their independence.
Yeah.
But we bolster each other. We give each other a hand.
It's a support group. Now, I promised in all the promo and whatnot that we would talk about how saving koalas. Are you looking at the clock and going, "Oh my God, I got to get out of here"?
My striated pardlote just popped in and had a look at me. Yeah,
I saw you just looking out there. So there we go. And I just put up on the screen there when I looked at that, I thought wildkoaladay.com.au. But that's
Koala Day, that's it.
wildkoaladay.com.au. We did briefly talk about it before, about how a flagship species, an icon species, what did you call the koala? Umbrella species, yes. Helps the other animals, and of course I've been talking about birds. Tell us what the work that Koala Clancy has been doing, and let's use the Little River as maybe the template. What birds have you seen coming back in, and what other mammals and say reptiles have you seen using the areas that you have been able to rehabilitate?
Well, one of our landowners has been doing bird surveys for many years on her property, and we've been planting on her property for many years. And she saw brown-headed honeyeaters nesting
Oh, wow.
on her property for the first time
Gee.
in our re-veg area, which is really interesting because they're considered a kind of common species, but they weren't on her property because
I was
it's
going to say
plains.
further north in Victoria, I would have said,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So
And she also has along her road, we've seen black falcon.
beautiful.
And spotted harrier.
I was just going to ask whether the spotted harriers have turned up because they're popping up all over the place now in places that they hadn't been seen for a long time. So
and what I'm looking forward to, because we've just planted 10 hectares of her property with grey box forest, which is not just strictly riparian, because this is an area that was originally woodland.
And so that's moving further up the slopes, I'm guessing.
It's actually pretty flat, but just beside a little wetland, a little drainage line. It turns out most of our area to the east of where we are used to be grey box woodland, and the benefit for swift parrots would have been enormous. When those trees flower, oh my gosh, they go right off. And she's even heard a barking owl on her property once. So, now, that's not as a result of our work, but they're critically endangered in Victoria. So I think anything that we can do to support some of those threatened species. Now, I'm particularly interested in whether we've done enough planting to get brown tree creepers back in there. 10 hectares doesn't seem like it's going to be enough to me. But brown tree creepers would have lived there once. They would have lived right through all of this area. And now they've become very hard to find, except at Ainsbury, which is another grey box forest. And still in the Brisbane Ranges and still the occasional one of the Yuyangs. But, poor little devils are not doing so well over here.
Yeah, I mean, it's important for us all to understand and support this kind of work, because the old rising tide lifts all ships. It really is the case that if you've got healthy habitat that koalas can recolonise and do well in, then there's going to be smaller mammals, and there's going to be like you've got your pardalotes there. But if the swifties are coming in, that means all the other lorikeets are going to be coming in. Yeah. And wouldn't it be nice if the rainbow lorikeets could thin out a bit around the country, and we could have maybe hundreds of them in the parks here rather than thousands. Just because it then gives all the other birds a chance as well.
Well, the koala has been assessed as one of the best umbrella species in Australia, and by that it means that conservation of koala habitat has the biggest impact on a very large number of species. So the other ones on that list were red goshawk, plains wanderer, I think, and a couple of others. A couple of other mammals and plants, but koala really stood out. So I know you sometimes hear some criticism of people focusing so much on koalas. There are other species to think about, and that's absolutely true. But koala does a lot of good when we look after habitat for them, because where they live is one of the richest habitats in Australia.
Absolutely, and there are, well, as you just pointed out, koalas are a key species for a certain habitat type.
Yeah,
and that plains wanderer, obviously for those grasslands, native grasslands, that they're the key indicator species that we understand. There may be reptile species or something too that are equally as important, but we probably just don't fully understand those relationships yet. I'm speaking with someone about helmeted honey eaters, and the like the important work that the friends groups and the departments and private landowners got together, years ago. When I was a kid, that work started. That's coming up, and we're doing an update on the Plains Wanderer in early November. So there's so many good things to talk
fantastic.
about. How about
I've just found a paper actually that deals with this, Grant. I might send you the link.
stick it in the private chat, and I'll bring it up and see what people can.
Yeah, it turns out it was actually, I don't think it was Plains Wanderer, but I might have got that wrong. But definitely red goshawk and koala.
Maybe the bustard, the Australian bustard.
Oh, they're an amazing animal, aren't they?
And let me get an add in. One of the most popular episodes of the Bird Emergency podcast has actually been the show on the red goshawk, where I spoke with Chris McCole about the work he's been doing with his trackers and whatnot in on the goshawks. Let me get this open, and
it's a University of Queensland piece.
Who are they quoting in this one? Oh, Hugh Possingham, another guest on the Bird Emergency. There we go, Professor Hugh Possingham.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'll put that link up to that. The study published in Conservation Biology.
Yeah.
Conducted by UQ, the Nature Conservancy, Wildlife Conservation Society, and the United Nations Development Programs. Now, there's a good indication of national and international cooperation, getting stuff done. And hey, someone like Hugh's a great advocate for birds, obviously, but really good at working within government and outside government at the same time, and getting things done.
Yes, yes. So if you love koalas and you want to help them, you are on the right track. You're doing the right thing.
Now, just a couple of minutes to go. So, if you've got a question in the chat room there, if you've got a question or a comment you want to make, now is the time to do it. If you want to ask Janine something in particular. Now, I did mention to Janine earlier on, before we set the go button, I want to lend as much of my efforts as I can to helping Janine and all the groups, and by extension the forest preservation groups and whatnot, all the people working to save our mammals in our remnant habitats. So you might be seeing and hearing a lot more furry creature material, probably not directly in the Bird Emergency, but sort of running alongside it. So I like all these bird adjacent things that can go out as bonus episodes, but I don't want to upset all my bird nerds who go, how come I keep getting all this other stuff in the feed? But
no, that's fair enough.
Yeah. So hopefully we can work towards that, and maybe keep just keep the updates coming and help people discover all the projects. I really want to talk to so many of the people who have been involved and seen the benefits on their own properties, so that we can spread that good news around and encourage more people to get involved around the country.
And you know how fast it happens, Grant.
It's just a couple of seasons, I'd imagine. As soon as you've got plants at head height, I imagine that you've got birds coming straight in. And
this year we were planting on this really big 10-hectare site in the old grey box woodland. The amount of bird activity, even on the tree guards,
Yeah,
was
amazing.
off the
Be,
wall.
because
I,
spiders and stuff get in the tree guards, So
yeah.
that's what people forget. Now, Janine, I'm just going to interrupt for a second and just sort of
Yeah.
say to everyone, the stream might drop out in a minute or two, so we'll just say thanks, Janine from Koala Clancy, for
That's a pleasure.
being a guest. Now we're not going to leave, but if it does drop off, we've at least got somewhere I can do a nice clean edit.
Yes. Fair
It'd be
enough.
great. And if not, we'll just keep going. Yeah, look, I think have we been successful by getting more and more people to understand how critical it is to look holistically as at all of these projects. Yeah.
I hope so. The problem is not with the people. I think taking a bit of responsibility for the state the planet's in is fine. But when big organisations are not paying tax, and when they're working as hard as they can against us, including government, then I'm afraid the responsibility lies in another area. This is my opinion on it.
Yeah.
And organisations like Mobil, Exxon, have been fighting us for decades.
But it's not only them, the big villains. It's all the other companies that and industries that work against contributing to society. And look, comrade. I also think I saw somewhere. I saw on YouTube the other day. Someone I was watching was promoting that that tax evasion. Tax evasion's the legal one. Tax avoidance is the not legal one. Was going on that you're a hero and it's actually a responsibility. And I just had to say, mate, you have got your head so far up your own ass. If on the one hand, if you're going to say, oh, I had to wait 4 hours in casualty to get seen when this happened, and then you're saying minimising your tax is something that you should be lauded for. No, the two of them, one causes the other, right? You can't have all the stuff you want if you don't want to contribute. It's
no. We're only asking for what is fair and reasonable.
That's right.
If an ordinary person has to pay their tax, then so does a multinational company, as far as I'm concerned. And I just don't see that this is an issue that can't be resolved by government. Right. It can be. Of course it can be. They're choosing not to.
That's right. They just have to have the will to do it, or we have to force them to do it.
There's no issue. And until those things are resolved, I just can't see the leadership coming from where it is supposed to be coming from at the moment. I want to see our governments leading us in best practice, at very best, and everything else can come under that, and they can tell us off, provided they're leading us in best practice. But they're not.
Absolutely. Now, Janine, I've got one final question I want to put to you. You mentioned Malakuta earlier on, and I know that you've been involved in bird surveys and whatnot over the years with Malakuta. After the bushfires, how is that area, the township of Malakuta, and the amazing forests and coastal fringe lands around the estuary and whatnot in Malakuta, how have they all bounced back after the bushfires?
I think bounce back is probably would be overstating it.
All right, recovering.
Look, it looks fine down there. You can go to Malakuta and have a lovely time, and you'll see a lot of birds. But I would have to say that East Gippsland's not going to recover from that fire. The parts of East Gippsland that are part of my soul, those enormous forests, there is no recovery from what
Yeah.
they went through.
So
We
we're never getting that habitat back. We will get wild
no,
places back, but it will be different.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there'll be leaves on trees, and too
Yeah.
many people show photos of those and say, "Look at the recovery." That's
Yeah.
not an
Yeah. Yeah.
ecosystem. That's a
No.
bunch of leaves on a very
That's right.
stressed tree.
That's right.
And this, I think we have to see that as we see the Tasmanian tiger. This was a battle we lost, and we have to accept that, and we have to make sure it doesn't bloody happen again, and that we listen to our experts when they tell us how to prevent this from happening. But no, you can't have it back.
Um,
Sorry.
Chris, no, you just gave me made me think of something. Chris and Liam, the Hemsworth boys,
Yeah.
plenty of money needed for koalas. They're here. They're now. They don't need to be reanimated. So, there you go.
I have no time for billionaires.
Oh, I got no time for celebrity poses either.
I have time. I have time for Gloria,
Yeah.
my 82-year-old volunteer, and the many and the Dorothys and the Susans and all of these wonderful people, and the Mon who we were just chatting to, who are doing as much as they can.
Yeah, in
That's
Brisbane.
who I rely on.
Yep, and that's right. Actually, I'm not against Simon and Mike at the moment. They can they're the good guys.
Who?
Mike at AGL, Simon at the Teals. Without identifying their surnames.
Yes, I know
but
who they are.
They're part of the good guys. I'm happy to be on their team at the moment. So you don't have to be a bastard, right? That's my point. You don't have to be a bastard.
No.
So
No.
well, folks. Janine, thanks again. You're officially friend of the show now, the second time. I hope we can talk again fairly soon, and talk about, maybe you can help me bring in some of the other koala groups, and we can talk about maybe the national framework, and see what the common points are and whatnot. But we'll have some news about that down the track. I think I saw a nod there, so that was good. Folks, thanks for joining us. Let me know. You can follow me at Twitter at Bird Emergency, not the Bird Emergency, at Bird Emergency. And hey, if you want to do donations, send Koala Clancy foundation.com.au some money, but also the birdemergency.com/coffee. I'm always up for a coffee or two. You can buy me a coffee, and it helps out greatly to keep my admin under control and the internet connected. So, which is what I need. Fantastic, Janine. Thanks, everyone. This has been the Bird Emergency, another bird adjacent episode. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Janine. See you later.
Thanks, Grant.